Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great honor for me to be here today. My speech is not going to be long because, as you all know, we have a very short time. My task is not an easy one, and I have always would have dreamt to stand on this podium, but not with such a heavy weight on my shoulders. I would like to pay tribute to Professor Micere Mugo and Professor Ama Ata Aidoo, who were members of our association and who we hold dearly. I will be speaking on all our behalf and also on behalf of many millions of people across the world who have been celebrating these amazing lives that we have celebrated and lived with and who we have lost. I'm going to move very quickly, and I beg your indulgence as scholars that I'm not going to go deeply into the biographies of these amazing women, because as Professor Ama Ata Aidoo said when I interviewed her in London in 2014, and you can see it on the very funny video, she said, "Go and Google it." So I will urge you as scholars to Google the scholarship and the work and the wonderful images. And I'd like also to mention that there are films. There's a beautiful film on Micere describing herself called Who is Micere? And she describes herself. And I would urge those of you who have not met them to have that introduction of that video of her telling you who she thinks she is. And also there's a wonderful film by Yaba Bado, who also has made a beautiful film, which many of you here have supported, on Ama Ata Aidoo. And you can buy that video online. It was due to be screened here, but unfortunately there was some technical issues and it wasn't filmed. So I'll go straight into my paper and I'll try and go through it as quickly as possible. It has been a solemn time of loss, yet of celebration as we remember the iconic figures Professor Ama Ata Aidoo and Micere Mugo. This tribute paper is presented by way of a weaver bird for all of us representing many voices. There have been many celebrations across the world. We've heard many words about these iconic people. So some of the words I speak may not even be my own. They may be words that I heard and I don't remember who said them. So I ask you all to forgive me if you hear your words coming out of my lips. I was very honored to be part of many celebrations, as are some of you in this room. I know that Nwando Achebe was with us in Syracuse, where Professor Micere Mugo was given a wonderful send-off. And I know that Professor Carol Boyce Davis is also here, who was in Ghana, who saw the sending off of our beloved Ama Ata Aidoo. We recognize, we were hoping, and I can't see her, but I hope if Mombi Mugo is here, I would like to recognize her presence, but she did say she intended to join us. Mombi Mugo is Micere Mugo's daughter. And I also wanted to recognize, pardon? Yeah, there's Mombi. Mombi, please stand and be recognized. And I believe you will all join me in sharing our condolences with Mombi and sharing our support as we go forward in the legacy work that she will be doing around her mother's work. And I also hope that we will support Kina, who I would also like us to recognize because her spirit is here with us, and I would like us to applaud Kina. That's Kina Likimani, who is Ama Ata Aidoo's surviving daughter and also sister to Mombi Mugo. We recognize all the ancestor spirits and those who are present with us here in the room or who may not have attended this year, and many of you who have been the pioneers of this organization. And if just by the show of hands you were here at the start of this organization, kindly please put up your hand so that the younger generations can also applaud you. I believe that we're going into our 55th, we're soon going to head towards our 55th year, and I hope you all gear up and start sewing your beautiful dresses for that celebration. I'm humbled and thankful to be the bearer of these tributes and thank those who have taken trouble to commemorate our ancestors and our path-breaking mentors throughout the world. We especially thank the families of both Micere and Ama Ata Aidoo, and the communities of Syracuse, New York, and Kenya, and those in Ghana for Ama Ata Aidoo, those in Zimbabwe, and across the world for both of them. I bring you greetings from the Micere Mugo Pan-African Solidarity Group in Kenya, who gave Micere Mugo the most amazing farewell in a complex situation in Kenya from where she had been exiled. And I salute them because they worked very hard. And we also want to thank the government of Ghana, who had a state funeral for Ama Ata Aidoo, and the media who allowed global farewells for these giants. This is unprecedented in history for radical and revolutionary feminist women, critics, scholars, and creative writers. I know that each of you has had an encounter of one kind or another with Professor Micere Mugo. Please continue to share your own reflections, including through scholarly teaching, intellectual and political engagement, through activism for justice, and in bearing witness. We have seen the influence of their works across generations, including writers such as Ngugi wa Thiong'o, with whom Micere Mugo worked, and many of you in this room who have worked with these iconic women. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie says she was inspired by the works of the likes of Ama Ata Aidoo. She says, I occupy the space of a Black African happy feminist because writers like Aidoo came before me. Her storytelling nurtured mine. Her worldview enlarged and validated mine. I feel a deep gratitude to her and for her writing and for her wisdom. This was published in the Africa Report. We know how special they are, and I invite everyone to stand for a minute of silence in their honor and in the honor of many matriarchs of freedom seekers who have helped our lives, our groundbreaking knowledge, intelligence, courage, joy, humility, humanity against extraordinary odds. As our ancestor Micere Mugo would say, Ashe, Afia, Moyo. Thank you. I would like to speak to the theme of living and speaking truth to power, and I wanted to explore this notion of a woman's exile, and a woman's exile not just from her country, not from her home, not from the classroom, especially for Black and people who we address as intersectional groups. What does that exile do when you cannot go to a country where you cannot live a full life? And to try and theorize what a woman's exile looks like and what freedom would look like. So my paper really is about freedoming, and in case I run out of time, I'm leaning very heavily on the ideas that Professor Micere Mugo and Ama Ata Aidoo talked about freedom, particularly Pan-African and feminist freedom. And Micere has gone further to theorize this work as liberated zones, which is a wonderful concept. And she urges us to develop those liberated zones from wherever we are. I also wanted to note, for those of you who are suspicious or who like to celebrate coincidences, that Micere Mugo and Ama Ata Aidoo were born in the same year of 1942, and they departed within a month of each other in 2023. I cannot compare them as they are not comparable, as each lived their own individual lives in specific circumstances which produced them, particularly the colonial era, of which shaped them as young girls. Independence, post-independence, and the upheaval world from which they just recently departed, where we can see these wars raging and we're heading to what many are terming as genocide, and where human threats are at the highest level, including through technology, climate change, and so forth and so on. But I could easily compare them because they were sister friends and had similar trajectories, and they loved freedom. Yesterday, we were privileged to hear Betty Wangui enlighten us at our panel when she talked about the unprecedented friendship, but she talked about friendship in a philosophical sense as a virtue. And I think the Women's Caucus and our friendships that we form here that enable us to work and to thrive can be looked at in this way, that we're not just scholars, that there's something else that is liberatory about the celebration of our friendships that enable us to work together with joy, to celebrate each other when we come to these luncheons and fly, like me, across the Atlantic so many times to celebrate and enjoy myself with you. So I also wanted to talk about epistemic departures, because we stand on these foundational epistemic departures. And we were just talking yesterday again with Carol Boyce-Davies in the panel, and we were looking at the timelines of the evolution of feminism. And we were saying that through Micere's work, including the transformation of the curriculum in Kenya, of which I'm a beneficiary, started in 1960s because Kenya had just come out of independence. And that's when the civil rights movement was happening here, and it's not until the 70s that the feminist movement started to evolve, what people refer to as the second wave. So we need to look carefully at these timelines and also the transnational nature of these struggles and how they feed off each other and how people learn from each other, and not to see it that Africa learned feminism from the West and things like that, because those things were already happening because of other historical reasons, such as colonialism and anti-colonialism. So their scintillating breakthroughs are many, and we here at the Women's Caucus know that Ama Ata Aidoo has a prize in her name with Margaret Schneider, which belongs to us. So every year we remember her. I would urge the Women's Caucus and the African Studies Association to also find befitting ways of honoring them both, Micere Mugo and Ama Ata Aidoo anew. I also wanted to talk about storytelling because they're both literary scholars, and the whole notion of orature, which features in both their written and their spoken word, and the fact that they made themselves present and physically available to us throughout their lives. I, for example, met Professor Micere Mugo through her work. I took my son by the hand when I was 10 years old. I had not met her physically, but I met her work and I fell in love with her thinking. And already she had started to talk about the breakdown of the independence that we had in Kenya. And at this point, Professor Micere Mugo would say, "Are you with me in practice of orature?" Of course, I can't say it as well as her, but she would even encourage people to sleep as she spoke. But she also encouraged them to wake up at the more critical points. She had a very playful delivery at the distinguished Julius Nyerere lecture, which is online, and it was called Artists and the Flowering of Pan-African Liberated Zones, Critical Notions of Our Time. And I would urge you all to watch the video if you're able to, but also to read the book, which is available. So in an obituary by the Daystar University, they wrote that Professor Mugo's art and philosophy were dominated by the motifs of song and celebration of humanity. Her poetry spoke of African cultures in terms of songs. In one poem, she famously asked, "Where are our mothers' songs?" And this is an epistemological question about how we research, because as you all know, when they all came to light, their works were neglected, and we still do not see women and feminist scholars featuring in the mainstream, although the work of an association like ours has made it possible for institutions and publications and gatherings that focus on the important contribution of women to society. But most of all, Micere Mugo celebrated what she called Utu, and where boundaries and nationalities become secondary to being human. I'll repeat that. But most of all, Micere Mugo called for the celebration of humanity, of Utu, where boundaries and nationalities became secondary to being human. On Ama Ata Aidoo, I'd like to borrow from Nana Wilson Tego, where she says of Ama, Ama, your words are still here. You are still here. And she says, who can blame us for vainly thinking that Ama Ata will always be around? For well over 6 decades, she has been a constant fixture in the literary landscape, a larger-than-life figure we encounter on whatever period of our literature we engage with. Unwaveringly, she has written our stories, poems, plays, novels, and essays, and fought our political, philosophical, and aesthetic battles in the global arena. She has been unsparing in her criticism of our stupidities and failures, but also passionate and consistent in her belief of our potential for greatness. As she would continually remind us, we too are old a people to accept that we have no alternative but our neo-colonial condition, that we must let time move unproblematically without giving it something of value to carry along. And I find this very profound, that we can give history something to move us forward, and I believe that we are doing that with the scholarship that we do. That was Nana Wilson Tego, and she goes on to say, Ama's own manifesto on African alternatives, for example, in her foundational Killjoy, will be read by generations as a masterpiece of seed time, the back-breaking, groundbreaking work of a pathfinder needing for, I won't read this, it's in Ama Ata's Aidoo's language, but I'll try, and please Ghanaians forgive me. Akokodur awodse kogi oman sifampi. Ama Ata wrote Killjoy when she was still young, again, like Micere Mugo, and with such courage and boldness that pushed her vision, and it will forever inspire younger generations and older generations. She is here, her expansive, warm, honest, forthright, no-nonsense personality will always rise before us as we read her works and recall numerous encounters with both delight and sadness. Throughout her writing, Ama Ata has written a poem for almost every African writer who has passed away. We have read and analyzed these songs of praise and sorrow as personal expressions of her passionate politics without ever thinking we may one day write a poem for Ama herself. Now, alas, someone must write Ama's dirge, and Nana's poem for you, Ama, is both a song of sorrow and a firm promise. Micere Githae is renowned for excellence in creative writing and her contributions to struggles of human rights and freedom of expression. She is recognized for her excellence as a creative writer, dramatist, performer, teacher, freedom fighter, human rights and justice champion, a feminist and a Pan-Africanist. She remained committed to the principles of Utu, Ubuntu, and socialism, Pan-Africanism, and global freedom for all humanity through her tireless pursuit, her humanity, her long struggles for human rights, for the downtrodden, for equality and for the preservation and restitution of the environment which sustains the earth. According to the retired Chief Justice of Kenya, Willie Mutunga, asserts that she stood for revolutionary Pan-Africanism, feminism, Ubuntu, Utu, and an ideological and political vision for liberation of Africa and the planet. She continued to defend human rights against oppression, which led to her exile. In fact, both Ama and Micere were in exile at one point together in Zimbabwe, yet another historical coincidence. And their quest for excellence, including in teaching for justice, and their creativity and their fierce defense of excellence is known to all of us here. Of course, I've mentioned earlier about her explorations in orature, which had been coined by pure Zirimu, but she took it to greater heights by defining it and actually perfecting it. And she used it in her teaching, in her delivery. If she was here, you'd all be dancing probably. So you all have seen Professor Micere speak on this platform, and people like Washanga Dirango, who has been doing some work on her biography, and Simon Gekandi have written on this work around orature. So she had turned to oral traditions as a source of metacritical discourse and a mode of criticism and teaching with its own epistemological foundations and ontological standing. And she took this to another level, as I said, and she says that it takes place in a site defined as a palava, a conversation, a disputation or different. And the task of the critic is to capture registers of speech that demand what she calls a partnership between the speaker and her or his audience. Are you with me? Her powerful critical works are suffused with the spirit of voice, its refrains, its incantations, all intended to invite the audience to become an active agent in the critique of colonial and neo-colonial knowledge. That is Simon Gekandi. And when Professor Micere was retiring from Syracuse University, Professor Biodun did give a tribute to her, and he said, if the award is given to the best and most impressive combination of creativity, scholarship and community service, or activism in a scholar or writer, I know of few others in the community of Africanist scholars that would be more deserving of the prize than Professor Mugo. Her accomplishments are varied as they are meritorious. This valedictory conference and festival on Micere's Mugo's tireless pursuit, which was held in 2015 at Syracuse during her retirement, was the most impressive and most moving valedictory celebration I had seen and participated in anywhere in my career of more than 4 decades. Some of us in this room were there, and we know that these words are true. I also now want to turn to the funerary farewells which I mentioned and which are continuing across the world of these iconic heroines to millions across the world in something that we have never seen before, at least in Kenya. We've never seen anything. The media carried this, the footage and the story of Micere's passing, and we all saw Ama Ata Aidoo receive a state funeral which was also viewed all over the world. And as I said earlier, this is unprecedented for scholars, for women and feminist revolutionary scholars, so it's okay for me to repeat that. So rushing ahead, if you're still with me, I will go to the end so that we can have a bit of time to chat if you like. Sorry about this, I wrote too much. I want to share, while I'm looking for my next passage, something that Nana Ayebia, who published Ama Ata Aidoo, says, and she says, Ama Ata Aidoo's story is a scintillating and remarkable one. If you were to introduce her, this is me saying, this is my words actually. If you were to introduce her, as I said to you, she would go and say, go Google it, as I said to you, and do look at that video. But I thought that it's important, nevertheless, for us to give Ama a proper introduction. And so this is what Nana Ayebia said. Ama Ata Aidoo has been a literary foundational force in my life, my formative years as a girl growing up in Ghana. I cannot even explain why I have always naively believed in her immortality. Her wit and wisdom cajoled and inspired us, words that were scribed and spoken with fierce conviction from the depths of her Akan royal tongue. Ama Ata's mission in her plays, poems, polemics, and novels were teaching on how to challenge injustice and the stereotyping of Africans by those who purport to speak for us without giving us a voice. Her literary vision was social justice for Africans, especially African women and all oppressed people of the world. Ama Ata was a renowned feminist writer who celebrated the Africana woman in all her complexities, elevating her to a place of uncompromising power and her ability to leverage the choices that were often denied her in a patriarchal society. So for some of us, her students and mentees, we have come to trust the faith she bestowed on us as agents of change by encouraging us to demonstrate through our writing and publishing that Africa is more than the sum of inaccuracies and stereotypes peddled about her. Never shying away from tackling our African failures, first against the colonial state and later against the corrupt post-independent ruling elites. She held strong views and communicated them with authority. Titles of some of her books signpost her abiding faith in our people and challenge the literary orthodoxies that threaten to drown out our voices. You all know the dilemma of a ghost, someone talking to some time, no sweetness here, an angry letter in January, our sister Killjoy, the girl who can, changes, diplomatic pounds, and African love stories where I happily feature as the last story in the book. So before I close, I want to summarize this question of epistemic freedom, because it's something that bothers me sometimes, because we've moved some way, but I believe we could move further. And these are some of the key takeaways that I have drawn from the works of these women, that we have to build upon the foundations that we already have and find epistemic ways to block those kinds of thoughts and ideas that can block our progress. And in my own observation, some of these theories come along cloaked in very glamorous garb, and sometimes we fall for them. But I think we don't have sufficient conversations around these theories which try to derail us from our trajectory. So Bessie Mohonja argues that and there's an essay that Micere has written about speaking from the heart of the mind, and she says that the model of scholarship has to be the scholarship through the heart, which locates it as a humanitarian and decolonial endeavor. And she directs us to pedagogies, methods, languages, and philosophies which demonstrate human ways of doing knowledge and knowing. She reimagines this through the ways of Utu, which I mentioned earlier, Utu ways of knowing, thinking, and doing, including languages and approaches and methods of producing and consuming ideas. I am a translator, as many of you know, and the absence of our languages in scholarship is something that has concerned me for a long time, because I argue that our tongues have been cut off and the ideas that come through those tongues do not filter through the work that we do. And it's not an accusation, because I am here speaking to you in English, but it's something which I think is urgent, because we assume that because people don't speak English, that they don't have foundational knowledge either at the indigenous level or at the local level. And sometimes there are our informers, sometimes unrecognized informers. We don't know their names, we don't know the words that they use, we don't know who the translators are, we don't know whether the translators are telling us the truth. We have no way of verifying the stories that we are being told, and that's what my theoretical work has led me to. So I'm encouraging you to take languages seriously, partly because we might be able to unearth knowledge that's not available to us in the languages that we know, and also partly because we need to preserve those languages, because our globe has survived because of the knowledges that those indigenous women hold that have brought us to here, especially around food and climate change and medical care for our families. The other idea that I wanted to share, that this work, I have deepened this work on translation, drawing from the call from Micere Mugo on orature, but because my own work is on translation, I have theorized something fresh and new, which is called traductio, which is and the deepening of this translational oral space so that we can hear what the other language is doing, and that is lacking in our scholarship. Most African scholars have this silently playing in the back of their minds because they can speak the languages, so they bring it into the foreign or the English or mainstream global languages, but we need to bring it to the fore because some of the words, for example, in Kiswahili, there's a neutral term for human being. We don't have he and she. So those issues of inequality which arise because of the use of he and she, when you're speaking about a person in Kiswahili, it is not there. A person is a person. So if you say somebody drank water, it could be anyone. It could be a man or a woman. But if you said he drank water, then of course we know. And of course I won't go into the big discussions about gender, but I'm just giving you an example. So my prayer is that we find befitting ways of bringing these discourses that have remained at the margin. They're very urgent because right now, as we speak, the last speaker of the San language, she's 92, her name is Uma Katrina. And I did want to show you some videos, but you can look her up, Uma Katrina. She's the last speaker of the oldest language on earth, which is the San language. And when she dies, that language will die. The San cultures hold some of the world's rarest fauna and flora, which sustain the earth. And you can look this up. I'm not making, that's a community, that's a custodian. The young people don't know this language, although she tried as much as she could in her life without resources to try and rehabilitate the language, but she is old, and most of us here are, I believe, over 18, so we don't have much time for the extinction of our knowledges. And I hope that the Women's Caucus and African Studies and other academic spaces will enable these languages to come to the fore, to continue the work. That is my own little contribution that I've drawn from these suggestions that have been made by our ancestors. I can see our president coming, so in conclusion, these are extraordinary giants who sadly succumbed to illness, but who served in exemplary and extraordinary courage through heavy social, cultural, and historical odds. The toll of their groundbreaking may not have made it easier, nor what I have called a woman's exile at home, in their countries, in institutions, in the street, in the air, and airports especially. But I have always believed that within the quest of intersectional freedom, which they grasped early in their lives, we should always seek to start from the most downtrodden, and that we ease the path for all. Let us remember them. They stood resolute in their approaches to freedom and liberation in their personal and political lives, making the saying, "the personal is political," a way of life. Their firmness and ability to stand and live by the values that they espoused is the theme of my presentation. May their courage empower us. May they rest in joyful sisterhood and in our memories for as long as we live and long after, and may we emulate their footsteps and make it easier for each other and for the subsequent generations. Let us do our lifting in ethical friendship and collegiate friendship, and that you and many others across the world continue to do, to be my sisters, beloved friends and colleagues who have all come here to honor them, and others who will join us in days to come. As Nana Wilson says for Amma, we have read and analyzed these songs of praise and sorrow as personal expressions of your passionate politics without ever thinking that we may one day write a poem for you. Now, alas, others must write their dirge and their poems for you. Let us write those dirges, not just for Amma Ata Aidoo, but all those heroes and heroines by institutionalizing them at African Studies Association and in the Women's Caucus. Se Ashe, Se Afia, Se Moyo. I thank you.